a strange thing to return to a place that you have fond memories and feel like you got to do something very special and sort of dodged a crazy bullet and was like, oh, I did it, and now to be back here feels really weird.
Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is a popcorn movie, splashy and forgettable like Transformers, and here lies the first problem. Star Wars movies are meant to be more than just switch your brain off popcorn movies, or so I thought. Star Wars is more than just simple entertainment, it meant something. The obvious problem that many people have with this film is that it's a shambles. Well, the whole trilogy of movies are. I know my analysis of this movie is late and everyone has already said it, but the film is a complete mess when viewed in its entirety. Given the series' importance and the amount of money invested in it, the transitions from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi, and finally to Rise of Skywalker are so arbitrary and poorly thought out that they are completely unacceptable. After the colourful but mixed reactions to the prequels, the sequel trilogy was meant to bring back that Star Wars feeling. Whatever your thoughts on The Force Awakens, it did that in spades. While it may have been a rehash of A New Hope, at least it felt like a Star Wars movie. The Rise of Skywalker is an empty void, and that's the problem. It would be an understatement to call The Rise of Skywalker, the final installment of the Star Wars Skywalker saga, underwhelming after more than 40 years of cinematic narrative. The Rise of Skywalker failed miserably in its efforts to appease some of the most irascible and vengeful fan groups, instead of becoming the victorious conclusion to the endearing franchise. This resulted in a complete disasterpiece that subtly undermined key plot points not only from The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, but also from the entire Star Wars franchise. It's no secret that the production of Rise of the Skywalker was rushed, with Colin Trevorrow being replaced by J.J. Abrams in September 2017, in order for the film to be released on May 24, 2019. Disney eventually decided to push the release date forward, giving each Star Wars episode a 2-year gap on December 20th, 2019. The Force Awakens, Rogue One and Solo did not have the same obvious sense of rushed production and behind-the-scenes conflict that the theatrical cut does. Aside from the plot choices, the film is essentially a glorified Find the MacGuffin, with little to no time for character development, interpersonal connections, world building, expositions, or even opulent action scenes. The end result felt woefully insufficient. What was John Boyega's Finn trying to tell Rey? What happened during the climax of the second act between Leia, Kylo Ren and Rey? In the first scene, who did Kylo slaughter? These were just a few key plot points that were clarified in post-release interviews or secondary sources due to unclear or missing content. The plot of the film did not require that every gap be filled, but it's telling that 4 years later we're still looking for answers to fill in these expository details. J.J. Abrams enjoys mystery boxes. He's made a career out of them, and then delaying the answers. Unfortunately, all that pent-up curiosity can be satisfied only if the damn box contains anything. Unfortunately, there isn't usually much in these boxes that is worth all the hype. Rather, the solutions sheepishly leak out of the seams rather than popping out. JJ's films frequently move at the speed of light, and I believe he is aware of this. You can't come up with a solution if the narrative doesn't give you enough time or space to consider the options. Speaking of moving at the speed of light, it's clear that two films were merged into one here. The credits scroll informs us that Palpatine has returned. Okay, fine, that will be an interesting angle. And how will Kylo track him down? And he's tracked him down 2 scenes later, may I add, after discovering the MacGuffin. Moving on. So, Rey just addressed Leia as master. Ooh, so Leia is instructing Rey in the ways of the Force. This should be interesting. And Rey has left the planet in search of another MacGuffin. Moving on. Well, less than 10 minutes in and we've already bypassed half a movie worth of content. The issue is that JJ is very good at asking questions. It is the reason we keep returning for more, no matter how many of his mystery boxes we have previously discovered to be empty. The Force Awakens kicked off the sequel trilogy with some major intriguing questions. Who's Rey? Where did Snoke come from? What happened to Luke and why is he fleeing? What made Ben Solo decide to join the dark side? The Force Awakens, the first film in the new trilogy, contains more mystery than the Riddler's riddles, which is a good thing. In fact, given that the plot picks up 30 years after Return of the Jedi, I'd say it's essential. The questions catch us off guard, allowing us to approach the 7th episode as tourists rather than authoritative figures. One of the primary goals of the story is to provide the delight of discovery. The Last Jedi took up the mantle and immediately began answering the questions JJ had left behind. Rey is a nobody from nowhere with no connection to anyone you've ever heard of. Snoke's origins are irrelevant because he's no longer alive. Luke's experience was that he had a mental breakdown after contemplating killing his nephew. Snoke and Luke eventually persuade Ben Solo to join the dark side. Part of the angst surrounding The Last Jedi stems from how these questions were answered. Fans were dissatisfied with the gifts distributed by filmmaker Ryan Johnson, and they had had their own ideas about what should be included in the boxes. They wished for Rey to have a well-known surname, Snoke to have a fascinating backstory, or Luke to be the hero they had grown up with. I for one would have preferred this angle, even if we've already seen those films. Despite its flaws, we can all agree that The Last Jedi tried something new. Whether for the better or the worst is up to you. With the return of JJ in Episode 9, JJ treats The Last Jedi's revelations as secret Santa gift exchanges you can't return. The answers to some issues that, in all honesty, shouldn't really matter that much are awkwardly switched in The Rise of Skywalker. Rey isn't anyone? Of course she is. She's Palpatine's granddaughter. Snoke was created in a laboratory tube, so where did he come from? At the very least, JJ was cautious about retconning Ben's conversation to the dark side and Luke's slip. Of course, he had to cram a few more secrets into the final verse. Naturally, the biggest question raised by The Rise of Skywalker is how Palpatine survived the destruction of the Death Star 2.
It's very unexpected. It's a total surprise when about a year ago, yeah, it was that long, I had an email from JJ and it said, we're thinking of bringing back the Emperor. How do you feel? So I controlled myself. I said, oh, sounds like a great idea. And he said, well, we're thinking about bringing him back because it would be just great to round off those 9 episodes, sort of the way we began.
JJ never mentioned it. Palpatine is simply hanging, scheming and cackling as if he never left. Regardless, we all witnessed him being atomized. Is he a carbon copy? Maybe. But the movie chooses to ignore it. What about the tens of thousands of cloaked spectators? The impossibility of assembling such a large armada in the middle of nowhere? Or the fact that each ship requires a large crew to function? Isn't Exegol only findable by the Wayfinder? How did they all get there? Why am I asking so many questions? JJ clearly couldn't care less, so why do we? Palpatine's reappearance isn't fully explained in The Rise of the Skywalker, possibly because there isn't a satisfactory explanation that would have us all nodding our heads in agreement. As a result, The Rise of Skywalker asks its audience to accept it and move on, rather than introduce some techno-babble to justify the undoing of previous movies' final action.
Somehow Palpatine returned? What is that? Somehow Palpatine returned? Somehow?
Somehow Palpatine returned. Poe Dameron's quips in an exponentially self-parodic handwave. C-3PO adds that Exegol is the hidden world of the Sith, and Poe continues subtly, so Palpatine's been out there all this time pulling the strings? Always in the shadows, from the very beginning, Leia responds, equally unsubtle. So it's definitely not a surprise at the end of the trilogy created by multiple creators who didn't sync up their stories. This film is exposition dump after exposition dump. The footage of Emperor Palpatine's return looks like a bad Hellraiser sequel. Palpatine's presence here might have made sense if he had been present or had some sort of effect on the 2 previous films. Instead, his crackles reek of storytelling desperation. Oh, and the First Order has now become the Final Order. Screenwriting mastery right there. JJ answers all of these queries in the same way he has answered every other mystery box he has ever created, by moving the storyline forward quickly and hoping we haven't noticed the obvious gaps in the story. Palpatine's reappearance is not even depicted on film. It is informed to us by the scroll, which is the most expositionally of all expositions, a literal display of text. And what makes all this worse is that it flies in the face of Return of the Jedi. Anyway, back to the MacGuffins. Poe Dameron discovers a snippet of the map that will lead to Luke Skywalker, the film's ultimate MacGuffin, at the start of The Force Awakens. The majority of the runtime is spent with the heroes and villains fighting over this bone. MacGuffins are useful when used correctly. The map was there to give the characters something to struggle over, to drive their motivations, and to give the story stakes in The Force Awakens. It also neatly tied the bow on one of JJ's favourite boxes. Where was Luke and why was he hiding? Unfortunately, in The Rise of Skywalker, the MacGuffins are treated like stacked Russian dolls. Finding the artifact, the guy, and the other items is as simple as connecting the dots. Character objectives and primary focused on obtaining MacGuffin X in order to advance the plot. The characters are unconcerned. Rey, Kylo, and the others are not telling the story. They're simply on a ride in an amusement park. Things happen for narrative reasons which are the absolute worst excuses, especially when the Emperor is luring a Jedi to the dark side in yet, wait for it, another throne room. Anyway, just like the film, let's move on. Star Wars has always played loose and fast when it comes to the laws of science, and that's fine as long as it stays within the confinement of the character's abilities and story that has been told. Of course, there is no sound in space, but we accept laser sounds and explosions. Despite its lazy pseudoscience, Star Wars has always maintained a certain level of internal consistency. These are planet-destroying Death Stars, but they require the expertise of a city that takes decades to build. Faster than light travel is common, but it requires precise coordinates estimates and minute calculations. However, things get a little too loose in The Force Awakens, when Han made two unusual hyperspeed leaps, the first from within a hangar and the second ending in the atmosphere of Starkiller Base. Both are successful primarily because Han is in command and has a history of flying in unusual ways. Looking back, we can see that they set a dangerous precedent. The Holdo maneuver was introduced in The Last Jedi, upping the ante by implying that anything equipped with a hyperdrive can be transformed into an autonomous missile capable of downing major ships. Despite this, The Rise of Skywalker manages to outdo its predecessors. Hyperspeed skipping is now as easy as riding a bike. The Millennium Falcon is being pursued by TIE fighters while avoiding hyperspace. Okay, that's nonsense. Poe is a great pilot, but when has he ever been shown to hyperspace skip? That's some rare bypassing the compressor bullshit.
I bypassed the compressor.
A coin-sized chip capable of fooling any First Order security tech? Sure, why not? When held up to the Death Star 2 fragments, a Sith dagger neatly points to the location of another Sith artifact. Are we even trying anymore? Hundreds of magical Star Destroyers piloted by pixies and buried beneath ice. Why are they buried when nobody is apparently able to find the planet? Each Star Destroyer carries a miniature Death Star, the planet-killing kind. That's it, I'm done.
Isn't that hilarious?
You're cute.
Done!
The technological advancements in the Star Wars universe have been viewed as a magic wand that can be waved to neatly raise new stakes and lower existing ones in each sequel. The careless handling of this setting in The Rise of Skywalker, on the other hand, was by far the cheapest and unearned. A long-running franchise should be handled with care. It necessitates the difficult task of sitting down and carefully considering the consequences of any changes you make. Unfortunately, JJ and the writers of The Rise of Skywalker took the easy way out. Mystery box, and don't worry about it. If all of this wasn't bad enough, JJ and his writing team somehow managed to top all of this with fake outs. You get a fake out, you get a fake out, everyone gets a fake out. While I was sitting there watching Rey and Kylo engage in a forced battle, the ship carrying Chewie blew up. While it makes sense for Chewie to be killed off now that Han has died, I finally felt some emotion in this movie. For a brief moment, I sat in stunned disbelief that Chewie had died. Nope. He was on a different ship. It's bad enough that this was a ruse, but it should have stayed with the audience for more than a single scene. What was the point of doing it? Only C-3PO was able to decipher the inscriptions found on the blade, which revealed the location of the Sith wayfinder they were looking for. C-3PO recognized the language as one of his system's languages, but his programming prevented him from translating because it was an illegal tongue.
Oh my god!
C-3PO is going to sacrifice his very being to help his friends. Oh wait, R2-D2 has recently made a backup of his memory? How very convenient once again. You almost had me this time, JJ. Ben Solo has just been thrown down a huge hole in the ground. He's dead? I'm certain of it. Oh wait, is that his hand? Rey just slayed Kylo with his own sword. Another sad but would be satisfying conclusion for Kylo. What am I thinking? She can force heal now. They did it. They finally did it, the crazy bastards. They sacrificed Rey in order to kill Palpatine. Finally, a satisfying arc for a character. I wonder how the Rebels do in response to Ben Solo. That will be interesting in the new trilogy going forward. And he's force healed Rey. But Kylo is dead, I think. No, just no. Bad movie. Very bad movie.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
At this point, I'll just assume Ben and Rey to keep the other person alive by passing the life force back and forth like a game of tennis. But instead, he vanishes. That usually means they're going to die, right? Did someone actually die in this movie? Each story should only receive one fake death, maybe two at a push. But my god, there better be rock solid character and story development, which this movie is clearly neither. With so many death fake outs, we are no longer afraid of what might happen because we have already witnessed the storyteller's lack of courage in making the difficult decisions. Chewie's death would have been heartbreaking. It's like John Wick's dog. However, the narrative lacking the guts to give us enough time to believe he had died, they appear to be hesitant to arouse any emotion from their audience. Every time a fictional world attempts something similar, the realism of its world is sacrificed for a fleeting response. It's mediocre and the story deserves better. If the story is repeated, it devolves into character and loses all credibility. By the end of the film, I don't care who lived or died, and JJ clearly has no idea how to write Chewie. He did not cry with Leia in The Force Awakens over Han's death, and he simply boards a shuttle while remaining silently compliant with his captures in The Rise of Skywalker. Chewie would have yelled and fired his bowcaster without a doubt. It would have been necessary to drag his matted, unconscious body onto the shuttle. The plot of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker squandered its potential. The conclusion that Rey, Finn and Kylo deserved will never be seen. JJ was too in love with what he felt was in the box to write a story that continued the themes from The Last Jedi and even his own movie The Force Awakens. I could talk for hours and we could could all give a plethora of reasons why the plot and characters in Episode 9 are poor, but that would only scratch the surface. Fear is the main flaw in Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. Never before has a film been so self and audience conscious. While having no idea what Star Wars fans actually want, Episode 9 is terrified of disappointing them. When the plot of the film was revealed, many assumed it was a hoax because it seemed too ridiculous and horrible to be true. Then, the unimaginable took place. We all watched the big screen confirmation of the discourse. The events of The Last Jedi were completely undone in The Rise of Skywalker, which only suffocated in the self-referential pandering to the original trilogy in general, and Return of the Jedi in particular. To accommodate popular fan theories, the film reached a level of ludicrous idiocy that few could have predicted. All of this is done to answer a single question: is this what you want? On every level, The Rise of Skywalker is defined by doubt, uncertainty and terror. It's a film that was forged in the boiler of fan reaction, and it's so eager to win the approval of a hazy fandom that it loses sight of its own individuality in the process. Episode 9 is not a story, rather it is a checklist of elements that the filmmakers hope the audience will enjoy. It appears that a script was pieced together after an algorithm was let loose in several Star Wars fan communities. Even the title sounds like it came from a Star Wars name generator. I know I'm not the first to say this, but one of the aspects of this trilogy that continues to irate me is the naming of these movies. They're all incorrectly titled. The first film should have been titled The Rise of Skywalker because the plot revolves around finding Luke Skywalker to aid in the Resistance, which is a perfect fit for the title. There's even a hint of Rey's ascension to Skywalker status. The second film in the series, titled The Last Jedi, should have been titled The Force Awakens because Rey gaining her powers and flashbacks of Luke and Kylo indicated the Jedi Force awakening once more. And don't forget the second film's finale, Luke pushing the Jedi powers to the limit once more, demonstrating the Force awakening into previous unseen abilities. Finally, the third film in the trilogy should have been titled The Last Jedi because simply Rey is the Last Jedi. One important lesson The Rise of Skywalker teaches Hollywood is not to be afraid to tell original stories, push the boundaries of your imagination, be daring and exciting. Even when resurrecting an old franchise, avoid doing solely for the sake of nostalgia. People are constantly on the lookout for new stories to tell, and there are always new ones waiting to be discovered. While the prequels and The Force Awakens have both been the subject of discussion for years, Rise of Skywalker is a very different tale. Whatever criticisms viewers may have about the previous two films, they were fully realised visions of cinematic storytelling that acted on their own instincts and stories. Several of The Last Jedi's biggest moves are reversed in Rise of the Skywalker, as are many of Abraham's own setups from The Force Awakens. It's difficult to imagine that The Rise of Skywalker will age well. In fact, it will most likely appear far more embarrassing in retrospect. Fandoms are extremely volatile social groups. It is absurd to believe that any franchise has a fanbase that is in uniform in its preferences. It's especially absurd for a series with such a massive global following that spans all generations such as Star Wars. Although, with that being said, I'm sure Star Wars fans can at least just this once come together and declare that Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker is a disasterpiece. And with that, I'll leave you with the best audience reaction to the ending of The Rise of Skywalker. Well, that's enough rambling for one day.
Who are you?
I'm Ray.
Not
Ray
you.
who?
Oh god. No. No!
Ray Skywalker.
No!